great welcome to Carlos Lopez Blanco, Global Head of Public and Regulatory Affairs, and member, of course, of the Executive Committee of Telefónica Group. Carlos, the stage is yours.
Thank you.
If you need a clicker,
no,
it's just on the left.
I will be standing up.
Wonderful.
Okay. Good morning to everyone. And first of all, let me thank again IDAT for this invitation one more year to share with you the views that we have in Telefónica about the digital future and the investment in the new digital infrastructure. But let me, secondly, to congratulate IDAT for this 40th anniversary. Really is a milestone in the world of the institutions like IDAT to survive more than 40 years, and let me congratulate for it. The first thing that I will start by saying that we have heard in the last months and in the last years that we are living in the middle of a big revolution, and that this revolution has its origin in the globalization process of the last years. Let me say first that we don't share this vision. The real factor why we are living now a big revolution is not because globalization. Globalization is a very, very well-known reality in the last 10 or 15 years. The reason why we are living now in the middle of our revolution is because digitalization. Because digitization in the global world is the reason why we are living now a huge revolution. We are living not in an era of changes, but in a change of era, because everything is changing. Everything is affected by this digital revolution, and this time is serious. This is changing all the business model and some of the most traditional sectors of the economy, like taxi drivers or hotels. If you take a look to the list of the top 5 companies in the world, in 2000, there were only one technological company and quite conventional, Microsoft. Now are 5 of 5 are companies involved in the digitalization. The digitalization is transforming the labor market, the way in we interact, and the way of that we move. And let me insist that everything means everything. So there will not be one single aspect of human activity out of this process. So this is why we think that is so important to understand this revolution. So it has been called the fourth industrial revolution. We prefer to call it the data society. And the main characteristic, let me go very rapidly through it, the main characteristic of this data society are the following. First, a new globalization. A new globalization not driven by the trade of goods, but driven by the flow of data. According to McKinsey, today, the flow of data is generating more value than the goods trade. So we are moving to a new sort of globalization based on the flow of data. Second, this is a very important factor. The barriers between the digital space and the traditional space, the physical space, are blurring. And this is something very important with a lot of implications in the policy aspects, because that will be that if we don't regulate and we don't understand in policymakers what should be the rules of the game for that call today, the digital space, we will have in 10 years' time that the whole economy and a lot of activities will be without regulation. The third is this idea that we don't share this idea that data is the new oil, because we think that data and oil are different, and data is much more than pure oil. Data implies rights, implies privacy, implies a lot of things. But there is one thing in which data and oil are the same. If you don't extract oil, you have no value. If you don't process data, you have no value. So processing will be the critical factor of this new economy. And this is the last aspect of this revolution, which is that should be fostered by an exponential, ubiquitous, and mobile internet in a hyper-connected society. So this is the scenario in which we are going to. And this that has been called the gigabyte society, which is the infrastructure and the technology behind this revolution, has been explained before. There are two technologies, two infrastructures, the fiber infrastructure and the 5G infrastructure. But as has been said, there is no a big difference between them, so both are complementary technologies and complementary infrastructure. What should be the policy to foster these two digital infrastructure? Traditionally, we have been three models. The American model focused on investment and deregulation. The European model focused in competition. And these two models has been living a, let's see, curious phenomenon of decoupling. When the Americans decided in 2003 to bet for deregulation, in Europe, we insisted in the competition and regulation and bundling as the focus of our regulation. But when the Americans decided 3-4 years ago to be back to the regulation, re-regulation with the reclassification of Chapter 2, in that moment, Europe started a process of deregulation, decoupling again. But now we are, for the first time in 20 years, with a convergence of two regulations, the European regulation and the American regulation, in this idea of trying to foster investment, to be focused on investment, and not just in competition. But anyway, as has been said by Montaigne, but Europe is lagging behind in 5G, in the development of 5G, and in the development of fiber, and has been leading this new infrastructure by the Americans and Asians. I think that Roland has explained it very, very well. But this is not because the lack of willingness of investors companies, telco companies for investment. So we have been investing heavily, and if you compare the ratio of CapEx versus the total revenue of the companies in Europe, we are investing in a percentage more than the Americans are doing. So I think that this is something that should be stressed. We are investing heavily in these new technologies. What does this new infrastructure will need? The first thing has been said, money. A lot of money, a lot of investment. This is something that requires, in Europe, a huge investment by operators. This is why it's so important to have the adequate framework for that. The second, innovation in partnership to understand how to develop this new infrastructure. So we have learned a lot about it in Latin America. In Latin America, we have learned about how to expand our infrastructure. And of course, we cannot translate this example of the connection of the unconnected in Latin America because it's totally different. But one thing we have learned in Latin America, the importance of trying to find new models and new innovative models of investment, and that the innovation can be done too in the deployment of infrastructure. The third thing which is needed here is new digital business models and new sources of revenue. So I think that this will be essential. And finally, the fourth factor, a new policy. And as you can imagine, this is the topic in which I am going to be focused in the remaining time that I have. A new policy to overcome Europe's weaknesses in the digital world. So Europe now has at least these 4 weaknesses in the digital world. First, we have a fragmented telco market, if you compare with the American one. Second, we have a limited prospect of growth, or at least is that the financial markets think about the European the European telco companies. Third, we live in a digital ecosystem, and we are going through this digital revolution in a sector which is dominated by American companies. And finally, we have a lot of issues and problems with the cybersecurity thing. This is why we endorse a lot that the European Union is doing, especially that the Commission has done with its proposal of new regulation for, through the Code of Telecommunications in Europe. So we think that this is a step in the positive direction, but our concern now is focused on the delivery. So what about the delivery of these new reforms? And that we think is that this new European framework is very positive, but falls short of addressing the issue of investment in networks. With these three aspects, the network access, we need no more rules, we need less rules. In spectrum, which has been said, one of the most critical factors for the development of this new digital infrastructure. And third, and not so important, let me be frank, universal service. And we have some examples, and Spain has been mentioned before. Is a good example that there is policies that has had a very good result. So Spain has passed from being one of the latest countries in Europe in terms of optical fiber deployment to be in total numbers, because has been other countries like Portugal that has done a very amazing job in the deployment of fiber. And now Spain is leading the number of optical fiber connections in the European Union. And Spain has done it through the economic crisis. So what the most serious economic crisis that Spain has suffered since the 40s has been able to pass from the bottom of the list of the fiber deployment in Europe to the top. And let me give you an example. Today, Orange has more optical fiber connections in Spain than in France. And that we think is that we knew how to do it, and there is two main things that should be done and that probably the European Union has to consider of the rest of the discussion about the new Code of Telecommunications. First, to remove legal barriers, reducing deployment costs. So this is absolutely essential. This has been a factor, an essential factor in Spain. Withdrawing outdated obligations. So you have in this list a list of specific examples of obligations and specific measures that has been taken in markets like Spain or Portugal to remove these barriers and to fit this process of huge investment in optical fiber. So outdated obligations has been essential to reduce, simplify deployments, and in this has been a critical factor to give the priority of commercial agreements between operators. This has been the critical factor upon which the deployment of optical fiber has been possible in Spain. And the consequence of this has been the reduction of deployment cost. And the second factor is a market-led pro-investment and to foster this cooperation and this innovation in regulation too. So including a light touch regulation. So for instance, in Spain, the regulator decided not to regulate the byte stream with a speed at that time. When the Spanish regulator took the decision was very bold, in the limit of 30 megabits per second. Now it's not so, has been so bold. And second, to introduce a set of rational obligations. So let me summarize these lessons that we have learned in the Spanish case and how they can influence the rest of the process of discussion in the European debate. First, this network access and retail pricing. So we think that probably the proposal coming from the European Commission was much better than the paper that we have now on the table, and especially in this aspect, and that we think is that the text probably should be back to the original proposal coming from the European Commission, introducing more flexibility, more in the network access and the deployment of network based on this idea of agreements among the operators. Second, I have now to insist the critical importance of a spectrum for the deployment of this digital infrastructure. I think that Craig has explained very well how important has been in the American case this availability of spectrum and harmonization. The duration of license is a critical aspect, and the principle of pay when available is a very important aspect too. And finally, in the universal service, that is no longer the elephant in the room. So I think that, thanks God, universal service is no longer a critical issue, but is still important, and that we think is that we have to bet for a clear model of financing the universal service using public budget. And let me finally give you a comment that I think that should be the complement of this regulation focus on fostering this new infrastructure, which is one of topic that we think this is essential as a regulatory and policy complement to this, which is the level playing field. Level playing field, there is two positions. There is somebody that says that the level playing field in the digital space should be the level of regulation of the incumbents. For others, the suitable level of regulation in this idea of level playing field in the digital space should be the regulation of the new entrants, the new digital companies. We disagree with both. That we think is that the level playing field should be the level required by the protection of our customers and the protection of the customers of the whole industry. That should be treated and protected in the same way. This is why for Telefónica, level playing field is much more than this idea of same service, same rules. It's same service, same protection, same service, same rights, and same service, same taxes. So for us, level playing field is essential as a complement of any regulation that can be taken to foster this new digital infrastructure. And let me finish with this idea that level playing field, forward-looking, and light touch should be the policy-making watchwords in the digital age. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carlos.